So welcome everyone to our guest speaker event today. My name is Sarah and I'm on the student team here at Entrepreneurship Hub. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm super excited to introduce you to our amazing alumni founder in just a few minutes.
Technologically challenged.
First, I'm going to give a rundown of today's format before I introduce Kent. So I'm going to start by introducing him with a brief bio, and then I will hand it over to our guests to describe their venture so you all have a better idea about what it is. Next, we will engage. Sorry, I'm reading this backwards. So we're going to start with an interactive portion with questions. And if you notice, this format is a little bit different from last fall. So we'll be using menti.com, which is an interactive platform where you, as the audience, can answer questions live and they will populate on the screen. Then we will do a brief in-depth interview about Kent and his entrepreneurial journey and that story about his ventures. And then lastly, we'll do his demo to kind of describe what he does and what he's created. If we have time, we'll open up the discussion to an audience Q&A where you guys can raise your hands and answer questions, and we'll pass around a mic for that. So with that being said, I'm super excited to introduce our guest, Kent Fortner, to the Hub community today. Kent Fortner was born in Kansas and graduated from William & Mary with a focus on English and physics. Honorable mention for his involvement in Sigma Chi fraternity, theater, ultimate frisbee, club soccer, and lots of IM sports. He now lives in California, where he's a well-respected winemaker and brewer, as well as a community contributor and entrepreneur. Kent worked his first winery job in Beringer and Napa in 1993, and then continued graduate viticulture studies at UC Davis. In 2000, Kent launched his own Pinot Noir project, Row 31 Wine Company. In 2013, he expanded his adventures from grape to grain, founding the Mare Island Brewing Company, focusing on artisan beers. Kent is also one of the founders of Pedal Fest, a bike festival on Mare Island, serves as a board member on both the Vallejo Chamber of Commerce and the Vallejo Waterfront Weekend, and is president of the board of the Mare Island Historic Park Foundation. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Great, well, it's exciting to have you here with us today. I think we're ready to move on to our interactive portion where we'll have a mix of audience and guest speaker questions. So for everyone in the audience, we need you to pull out your phones and open up menti.com.
This is super hectic.
You can use the code to join the presentation. Give me a thumbs up when you're in.
Did you figure it out, Stu?
We didn't have computers when I went to college.
I gotta tell you, what's funny to me is, so there's different breeds of entrepreneurs, and they're kind of their own species, I think, but a subspecies of them is mine, which is very, very traditional businesses. I make wine, I make beer. So I don't even really know what QR codes are these days. So this stuff's kind of wild to me.
Everyone good? All right, we're gonna move on to the first question. So first question is, what are some valuable qualities to have as an entrepreneur? So this is gonna populate as a word cloud, so you can put in as many words as you like and they will show up on the screen. Are people putting in words?
I think it went to a different.
Mine's still on the same one as the last one.
Oh,
Quality.
One moment.
It went to ranking the pillars first.
Oh, okay.
start with the first one.
I guess I mentioned a little bit of your involvement at William and Mary. Do you want to touch on that a little bit while we're waiting? Some things you were involved in?
Ultimate Frisbee, please.
Ultimate Frisbee?
Yes.
So I think you have to understand that I don't think of myself as that old, but it was almost 30 years ago. And I was just talking to Stu Stern here sitting in the front row, and he was talking about how he was even a generation before me almost. It was a very different thing back then. And Ultimate Frisbee was literally a flyer that got put up on the kiosk, which I think is still there outside of kind of near Washington Hall, kind of near the Red Building right there. And it was just like gather at this time and play. And that was it. That was the whole thing. And then we would rig up against University of Richmond. We would just call some friends up there, and we'd drive over there, we'd stay the night with them, and we'd play a couple games against them. So it was a very organic kind of thing. School-wise, I was an RA for 3 years, which has proven extremely valuable to me later on in life. Just kind of learned the HR angle of things, and I'd recommend it to anybody. It also gets to pay for your housing, which is very nice. A couple other things that I really value from college. I was a member of the Sigma Chi fraternity when I was here. It was a very, very social thing. We did derby days. I don't know if that still exists or not, but we flooded the Yates Field with about 3 inches of water because we had a guy who was a firefighter, and we did a mud fest, and we raised all this money. All the sororities would come and they would do all this stuff. We raised a whole bunch of money for a charity back then, and then we had to do 2 more fundraisers to fix the field because we had screwed it up so bad in the process of the whole thing. But I was a big part of a lot of the social scene that was on campus. A couple things I'll give a shout out to is if you're thinking about going into business in any format, go take Accounting 101 and Accounting 102. Even if you don't take any other business courses at some point, that has been invaluable to me over the years of just understanding how the numbers work in a business, because it's a different way to think about things. And the people I know who didn't learn that have really learned it the hard way later on in life. So I was an English major, and I took Accounting 101, Accounting 102, and I consider it incredibly valuable when I was there. Let's see, theater, I did West Side Story was here. Glenn Close came back and talked to us while we were here, which was super cool at the time. And what else was on the list that I was telling you about? Oh, yeah. Similar to Ultimate Frisbee. I don't know if anybody does this anymore, but you get one golf club, 1 tennis ball, and sometimes you'd have a caddy, and there'd be 5 or 6 of us, and we would it'd be swim library. Have to hit swim library in six strokes, and we would play campus golf all around campus, and we'd get in a little trouble for leaving divots here and there as we were going on, but campus golf was an every Friday afternoon thing about 3 o'clock that we used to do. It was really, really fun back in the day. So there was a lot less clubs than what you guys have access to these days. We didn't have study abroad. That was not a big deal back when I was there. All stuff I think you guys should take advantage of, but we did a lot of kind of making our own fun. One other, while you're working on that, is my freshman year, physics, we went to the professor and we said, hey, we were doing hydraulics, and I said, could we build a raft and float down the James River and get credit for it at building the raft? And he was like, sure, why not? And so we went and got a hold of these 4-foot by 8-foot sheets of styrofoam that they used to insulate walls with. There was a girl that my friend had dated whose father owned a Ace Hardware up in Richmond. He provided the lumber, and in the basement of Unit F, we built basically a barge, and we ended up taking it up and rafting down the Chickahominy River for 3 days. And I got 1 credit course work for that out of my physics teacher on that whole thing. So that gives you an idea of how different my college experience was than probably where we didn't have anything like this.
That's awesome. You have so many diverse experiences. So I think a lot of students in the room can relate to any part of that, really. But yeah, it looks like the Menti's working. So as you look at this, you can also see it over here. Whatever's easiest. But are there any that resonate with you or that you agree with or want to expand more on?
It's so, how about I go into one that I think is missing from that sheet? And that would be curiosity. I have to say, I know a lot of people have started businesses successfully, some not, but the ones who really succeed or really into it, they have a burning curiosity to try to figure out how things work. And it can be super annoying, actually. You sit down and you tell them just a nugget of an idea, and they start digging in on you in a depth that you can't get under like a dog on a bone. And I do think it's kind of a prerequisite for being able to figure out what is an opportunity and where to go and how you're going to succeed, is that sense of curiosity. The other one that I actually don't see up there, although there's a lot of things there, is salesmanship. And that sounds a little shallow, but there is pretty much nobody who started a company or an organization else who hasn't had to go sell investors on the idea, or their employees on the idea, or their wife on the idea, or themselves on the idea. And the ability to go out and promote, I think, is really critical. It doesn't mean if you have a great idea, you can't start a business, but you might want to find somebody as a partner who is an amazing promoter, because otherwise, if you don't have that piece, a lot of things just die because they haven't been properly visioned to somebody on the other side. So I throw those two out there. The other one, a lot of these, adaptability, I think passion really fits in. Looking at self-compassionate, change that a little bit. I want to give a shout out. Dr. Grace is sitting over there in the corner. Raise your hand, Dr. Grace, just so everybody knows where you are. Come on, higher than that. He has Center for Mindfulness and this program, Authentic Excellence, and online it is Life Values and Mentoring. And one thing I wanted to share with you guys is that from my journey, one of the hardest things has been self-management as this goes on. And I think you'll find entrepreneurs a lot of times, they're wired in a big way, and kind of a lot of times don't know themselves very well, or don't know when to stop, or don't know when to pull back, or don't know how to manage their time. And I worked on that for years and years and years. And I only discovered Dr. Grace's program probably a year ago, I guess it was at this point. I've been through it. And it's been super helpful to recenter things and kind of know where to head. So I think something, if you get into starting your own business, you never know when to stop. It's really hard to know when the day ends, when the project ends. You're always worried it's going to blow up on you, so you just keep going at it. And it can cause a lot of strife. And I think somebody who's able to detach from that and know what their limits are is super important. And so a couple things that aren't on the board, but that I recommend to you all.
I think that's great. Entrepreneurship can be really stressful at times, so being able to take a step back and really center yourself is great advice. I think we're ready to move on to the next interactive question. So that's going to be, how would you define success in your life? And I believe these are free responses that will populate the board. As these populate, I guess you can start to think about, are there any similarities or differences you feel with your own definition of success?
So I might, again, challenge some of these. I think they're fantastic. Does anybody know an author, John Irving? Any of you guys ever heard John Irving? He wrote World According to Garp. It's probably one of his famous ones. His best book is Prayer for Own Meaning. If you haven't read Prayer for Own Meaning, it's one of the best books ever written. He's kind of the Charles Dickens of our age, I would say. He wrote a book called Cider House Rules. It was later made into a movie. Tobey Maguire and Charlize Theron was they were in it. It was a fantastic movie. In Cider House Rules, not to get too complicated, but there is an orphanage, and there is a doctor who is the head of the orphanage. And he basically de facto adopts one of his orphans to become the future doctor of this orphanage. And it's a miserable place. And eventually the kid breaks free, and he goes out and has an adventure in the world, and he sends this letter back to the doctor. And he says, I'm finally happy for the first time in my life. And the doctor, who's a bit of a curmudgeon, sends a letter back to him and says, I didn't raise you to be happy. I raised you to be of use, is what he says. And it took me a while. I would say the way I measure success is the contribution that you're making to the world. And I know that sounds very highfalutin, but the ability to say that I have contributed this, whether it's something creative, whether you're helping other people out, whether you put, just put Facebook on the map or something like that, that contribution to me is more important and frankly brings joy and brings happiness back at the back end when you do that. And I see it through family, I see it through community. And I think one thing I challenge all of you is money's up there, and don't get me wrong, I'm focused on money as well. And interesting, Dr. Grace's program has a series of values. One of them is financial prosperity. I think if that's all you chase after, you can end up in some pretty dark places as to what you were doing. And as a person who developed a winery, cautionary tale I might give you is a huge chunk of my customers are hedge fund guys, hedge fund women. And a big part of it is after they made all that money, they were like, this is very unfulfilling for me. I haven't actually created anything of value. I haven't created anything of worth. I don't have anything I can hold in my hand. And a lot of them come out and they're just so fascinated with the idea of taking grapes and the alchemy of turning it into wine and having this bottle at the end of it. So while I think money is very important, it's certainly a way of keeping score. Once you got everything covered, think about why you're going for more at that point and what is the contribution you're making. And as best as you can, this is just, I think, advice for life is don't get into a zero-sum game. Don't get into a situation where you're taking it from somebody else and it's just a matter of who won that. If you can make it so everybody's winning, if you can grow the pie, I think the fulfillment that comes with that is pretty amazing. That would be my definition of success.
Yeah, I think that's great. Keeping things very mission driven is what keeps you wanting to go. And if it's just focused on one small aspect, it's not going to be very sustainable. So I think that's great.
And one of the things, I know I'm talking about Dr. Grace Love, but one of the things that comes up in this program that I think is amazing is, I'm going to paraphrase and I'll probably get this wrong. When they looked at Olympic athletes, them being focused on whether they're going to get a medal or not, did not do as well as those who just focused on the performance. Because if you're focused on the performance, the medal will come at the end of the day. And I think that's, getting good grades by all means. I hope all of you do. But you can't control the ultimate grade they give you. You can only control the work that you put into it. And you got to find value in that work. And I think it was really something that was really helpful that was delivered to you by Dr. Grace.
I think that's great. So we'll move on to the next question. So this is the last interactive question we have today. I know some of you probably started earlier, but if you could just rank our pillars, which are over here on the wall, by level of importance to you. So we have 8 pillars. 4 of them are kind of based in skills, and the other 4 are based in a mindset. And they're all things that we feel as a center are valuable to have to become an entrepreneur. But we want to hear your thoughts in terms of which ones you think are more important in your life. And then I'm going to ask Kent to talk about his thoughts.
So have they already been ranked by everybody here?
Yeah.
Oh, they have. I love that grit is number 1. So I'll kind of jump on a few of them. First of all, in grit, if you're going to start a business or start anything, if you can't get on a red-eye flight in a middle seat and do 6 hours of work and 5 hours of flight and get off the flight and go take a sink shower in the airport and then take an Uber and make a pitch to somebody successfully and enjoy every aspect of that, you have no business starting a business. It requires this level. You almost have to wear these things like a badge of honor that you have gone to this depth to go do these things. And if you're somebody who's like, none of that sounds like fun, I would never do any of that, go work for the government, get a job under somebody else, like that, you've got to have that sort of level of grit that's there. So I totally agree with that one. Openness to risk. I'm going to actually challenge that one. I was telling somebody today, I was talking to them, I don't find entrepreneurship risky at all. I know that may sound a little bit weird to you, but to me, risky is working for somebody else who you may or may not agree with, who might change in a moment. They might hire a different boss that you're going to work for in an organization that you don't control. To me, that's incredibly risky. I hate that. If I couldn't do what I'm doing now, I'd start another business because I never want to work for somebody else. And to me, I've always had control over what I'm doing. Yeah, there's a lot of outside factors, et cetera. But at the end of the day, I've never really found it that risky. And I think there is a point, there's a question later on that you said you were going to ask that I'll jump into now. there's a point as an entrepreneur, and this has happened to me about 3 or 4 times in my life, where you see something so clearly, you see an opportunity, and concurrently, there's usually a bunch of people who don't see that opportunity. And you're sitting there thinking, this is so obvious, this thing right here. What the hell is wrong with you? Why don't you see this? And it gets clearer and clearer and clearer as you look at it. There's no risk involved in chasing that thing down. That's the aha moment when you've figured out exactly what it is that you should be doing. And so I've never felt there was a risk, I guess, in that. Failing wisely, I'm really bad at this. I tend to cling to things until they absolutely go 6 feet under and die. And I think carrying them off earlier is something that actually I could do better. I've already talked about self-direction. I think that's just critical to this whole thing. Collaboration. I'm a one-man band. That's the way I describe myself for about 20 years of my career. At a winery, nobody helped me. I didn't have any employees. I loved it that way. It's just very creative. That's how the winery functions. The brewery that I started, we have 87 employees now. We're about to get to 90 next week. Very different world. And it took me a long time to learn about collaboration. Now I have managers that we pay. Hurts the bottom line. I don't have as much control. I'm not able to do things exactly the way I want to, but I can also fly out to William and Mary for 2 days and not be stressed about things because I've got people in place. So that's been really important for me. Tolerance for ambiguity. Again, like I said, when you see it clearly and nobody else does, to me, it's not ambiguous. Also, I've always, for all my business ventures, I write a super detailed business plan that goes soup to nuts all the way through the next 10 years. I do that knowing that it's going to change 1,000 times between now and then. But if you don't have a clear path, at least one clear path that you've identified, it makes it really hard. And I saw when I was looking through the pillars, it was like throw something out there in the world and kind of see how it goes. That's a different subspecies of entrepreneur. That's not me. I always knew exactly where I wanted to go. It changed 1,000 times after that. But if I didn't feel like I knew where it went, kind of freaked me out, quite frankly. So I don't know if that's a better pillar I can learn, or maybe you understand that this subspecies of entrepreneur is a little bit different about that. Opportunity discovery. Have you guys ever heard of the parable of the 2 shoe salesmen? Is this anything anybody heard of this? So this is a parable. They found in the Pacific this giant island nation that had never been discovered before. Nobody knew it existed. Had 1 million native inhabitants in it, and 2 shoe companies each sent their top salesmen in there to figure out this marketplace. They both landed at the same time. They never saw each other. They both went walking around, looked at everything. The first shoe salesman gets back to the hotel and he says, calls his boss and says, boss, I have really bad news. Nobody wears shoes here. It's not part of their culture. The other shoe salesman calls back and he says, hey, boss, I've got the most amazing news. Nobody wears shoes here yet. Send the whole sales force over. And to me, that's the difference in the opportunity is one person just doesn't see it at all. The other person's like, this is so obvious. It's unbelievable. So remember that parable as you get into something. Improvisation, yeah, absolutely. You got to be able to move on a moment's notice. It's exhausting, but that's part of being an entrepreneur.
I think that's great. Thanks for touching on all of those and really relating it to yourself and your own journey, because no one's journey is the same. So it's really great to hear your own perspective on that. So kind of a nice segue, we're going to hone in on one of the pillars, which is opportunity discovery. And this usually happens on the earlier side of your ventures. So could you take us back to the beginning before your ventures were a reality, and how did you initially discover those opportunities?
Yeah, so I'll give you a thumbnail. I told you I was a member of a fraternity when I was here. Drinking was a big part of it. I like to drink, but probably more so than that, I was really into wine. And the reason I was into wine was because I grew up in Kansas. I had barely been outside of Kansas when I was growing up. And I went to work for a restaurant and I got a job dusting bottles of wine. And as I was dusting these bottles, I kept pulling them out and I was reading them. I was taking Spanish and French at the time in high school. And the owner of the restaurant kind of took shine and came over and he's like, you seem really interested. And I'm like, yeah, tell me about this. He's, oh, it's in Burgundy. It's on this bank. The Nazis went around it in World War II because they wanted to preserve this vineyard. And wow, it's amazing. Tell me about this. No, this is from the Priorat. This is down in Spain. Oh, okay, I'd like to travel there someday. And it was kind of a way to get out of Kansas mentally when I was going into it all. And I won't get in trouble because he's passed on, but I was 14 at the time when I was working at the restaurant. He's like, well, why don't you come to the tastings? Drinking age is 21. So I started going to these tastings and nobody seemed to care that I was tasting. So I was just tasting while I was there. And I like to argue that I had the best palate of any 14-year-old in Kansas when it came to wine back in the day. And that got me really, really interested in wine. So when I came out here, I worked for the Trellis restaurant, which was down here for a long time, and worked in restaurants. I owned a wine bar and wine shop in Boise, Idaho, which was a little ahead of its time in Boise. I sold that when I was 25. I got $30,000. I thought, holy cow, I'm rich. Can I retire? Like, this is an amazing amount of money. And I went out to California and I found a winery called Shalom Vineyard. It still exists, but it's not as fancy as it once was. And I went up to him and I said, hey, I used to own this wine bar called the Grape Escape in Boise, Idaho. And they said, wait, you're the Grape Escape guy? And I said, yeah, I'm the Grape Escape guy. He said, hang on, I get the VP of sales and comes down. He's like, yeah, we would run our top accounts across the country. Would be accountant in San Francisco, accountant in New York, accountant in Las Vegas, accountant in New York, an accountant in Los Angeles, and Grape Escape Wine Bar in Boise, Idaho. We've always wondered who the hell that was. Boy, I absolutely love your wines. Is there any chance I could come work as an intern for you? I think I even said, like, you don't have to pay me because I was feeling so wealthy at the time. And they're like, yeah, come on board. So I joined up as an intern with them. I was working for minimum wage. It was so fun. And then there's a winemaker and an assistant winemaker at most locations. The assistant winemaker left to go get a job at another winery. And they came to me and they're like, you have a chemistry background. And I said, physics. And they said, close enough. You're now the assistant winemaker. And so right place, right time, I became the assistant winemaker there and just fell in love with wine. It was just this unbelievable opportunity. Went back to UC Davis, got my degree in viticulture, which was super helpful. And then I just started working for wineries all over the place. I worked for 27 different wineries over different times because of different harvests and learned all that. And coming back to the sense of opportunity, and I was telling them a very traditional one, there are so many wineries out there. There are thousands in the United States. I mean, the Romans started making wine back in Roman times, and this is nothing new that I was doing. But what I had that I think others didn't is I had a full understanding of the full function of growing wine, making wine. I had sold it in my shop. And I think what I saw that maybe others didn't see was wine is a very traditional business. People like for it to be traditional. I was an English major. I like writing letters. So rather than going online with everything, rather than going to apps with everything and all that, I kind of went back to old school. And I was like, I'm going to make this wine and this wine only. So I make one wine, Red 31 Pinot Noir, you see right here. And I make only one wine. And the other thing I realized is all these hedge fund folks were coming out and all these Silicon Valley guys were coming up and they were hankering for, they wanted to touch the winemaker. That's what they really wanted to do. They wanted to know that this was made by somebody. They wanted the sort of alchemist aspect of the whole thing. And I was like, well, I can do that. I can write the letters. I can say hello to everybody. So to me, it was an opportunity of, I know how to make great wine. I know how to sell it. So I've got most of that stuff covered. But I'm also seeing that everybody else is going to focus on the product. I'm going to focus on the message. And I'm going to focus on sending these emails or sending these letters to everybody. And I think it just really resonated with people when we did it. And that was part, I looked around, I was like, nobody else is doing this. I don't know why nobody else is doing this. And it wasn't hard to take the model that I knew and shift it into the model that we do now. So that was kind of the evolution of starting a business. So another thing that's a big axiom for me is dream big, test small, and then invest. And so I had this vision of what the winery could become and everything. And then I made one barrel in my garage. That's what I did. I was still working for somebody else. I made one barrel in my garage. I made 25 cases. There's a movie called Sideways. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this. Prior to Sideways, Pinot Noir was like nobody had ever heard of it. Sideways came out while I had that wine in barrel. So when I released it, everybody was like, oh, you're brilliant. And I'm like, I am no more brilliant than I was 12 months ago. There's just a movie that came out that made Pinot Noir really famous. And I released that 25 cases. It sold out instantly. Everybody loved it. Then I dumped my life savings in the next year. So one thing that I think is really handy is if you can find a way to test something small, your risk isn't quite as high and you can adjust what you're doing rather than going all in the beginning. You get yourself in a lot of trouble really fast there when you do that. So the winery's been around since 2000 and frankly was getting not bored, but I was doing the same thing over and over and over. In 2013, moved down to an old naval base called Mare Island. Kelly's been there. Very historic, 1854 was when it was founded.
And it's got these old cranes that are on the waterfront, and all these old buildings from before the First World War. My wife and I moved into one of the old officers' quarters. It looks a lot like Williamsburg, which I didn't realize till after the fact. That's probably why I was so attracted to it. And the city forefathers, all the city council members, they sort of came over and they're like, hey, Kent, would you move your winery from Napa Valley down here to Vallejo or on Mare Island? And I said, well, my wine customers, they're wearing ascots, penny loafers, and they like to see all the vines on the hillsides. I think they would look at these cranes and be like, what the hell's up with these cranes? But my brewing buddies would be like, check out those cranes. And so I said, well, this really needs a brewery. So I wrote a business plan and I put it together. And then Lehman Brothers went under days before I was getting ready to start looking at putting it in place. And it was a total disaster. So I put it on a shelf. Fast forward 4 or 5 years, I run into a former winemaker friend of mine. He had gone to work for Lagunitas. I don't know if Lagunitas is big out here, but it's one of the biggest breweries on the West Coast. And I said, hey, how's your world? He's like, well, I went from grape over to grain. I'm working for Lagunitas. I love it, but I wish I made more money and I wish I worked for myself. And I said, oh, well, come here. And I took him over to my garage and I pulled this business plan off the shelf and blow all the dust off of it. And we sat down and we went through it. And going back to collaboration, he was the first business partner I ever had. And it was a fantastic collaboration we did. And we built a brewery, we'll bring out some of the beers later, on the history of Mare Island. That is the branding behind it. And Ryan makes killer beer and I handle everything else in it. And we put the brewery together, which now has 90 employees. We have 3 tap rooms and kind of took over that. I then, and this is when Taylor, I think might help you guys, started a third business called Squire Livery, very small. And I found this guy, his name was Kent, which was very, very confusing because that's my name too. But his name is Kent. And he was a driver for a company that would tour Napa Valley. So you would pay $80 an hour to go tour around Napa Valley, not have to drive. And he's kind of got the keys to the kingdom. He knows all the inside places. And I said, look, you're working for somebody else. He said he wanted to work for himself. I said, why don't we do this? I'll buy the car because I had great credit. You drive the car. Make sure you meet everybody that you're picking up at the brewing company. Drive them around to a bunch of wineries in Napa Valley, but stop by mine. And at the end of the day, drop them off at the brewing company and drop them off a half hour, 45 minutes early if you can, before they're getting their ferry back to the city. And so I had this closed loop going. It was fantastic. Everybody had a wonderful time. They got to visit the brewery, they got to visit the winery, they got to drive around. They had a great time. And I'm selling them beer, I'm selling them wine, and they're paying $85 an hour to drive around. And it was this amazing little microcosm. And going, I ended up I sold the car business to my business partner because the laws changed and it got a lot harder to manage in California. But it was a nice little ecosystem, if you will, that was there back in the day. So that's just kind of a little bit of how the opportunities all came about on those 3 ventures.
I love that, especially your emphasis on the customer and what they're looking for, and you're really intentional with your branding that way, like the wine, getting the traditional, experience that people want, and then with the brewing company, with the history of the area and all that. So that's really great. So you touched a little bit on this, I think, in some parts of the venture, but in either one, was there a make or break moment or a turning point where you felt things changed for the better or the worse, or?
I think I've touched on it for the most part, but Sideways coming out made me realize there was this opportunity, and I was one of the few who knew Pinot Noir and had it in barrels. So that was a big one. I will tell you, I got advice from an attorney friend of mine when I was younger. I was fresh out of college, and I was thinking about starting some other ventures. And quite frankly, I wasn't ready. I didn't understand the venture I was going into, didn't understand myself well enough, whatever. And I was talking to this attorney friend of mine, he's the father of a friend of mine, and he said, well, the beauty is you're so young. Go give it a shot. And if you have to declare bankruptcy, you got plenty of years to figure it all out after that. And I have to say, I don't have the luxury of declaring bankruptcy anymore. I've got one kid in college here, in fact. I've got another kid who's going to be in college in a few years. There is something to be said for when you kind of got nothing to lose and you can go out there and take a shot at it. And for me, the sort of turning point, if you will, the sort of make or break was when I went all in. I had my entire life savings in 30 barrels of wine. It hadn't been released yet. We were having our first child, and I lost my health insurance because I was no longer working for the company I was working for. And when you got to feed your family, you'll do anything to make that work. Before that, it's a little bit of ego. Before that, it's a little bit of trying to create something. When you got to feed your family, it's a totally different world. And so that was really stressful for a couple of years. And part of me wishes I had started all this before we started family, but at the same time, it kept me grounded in what I was kind of chasing down at the time.
Yeah, those like external motivators for sure. I'm gonna do a quick time check. But yeah, I think we were gonna do a bit of like a quick demo where you can pull up your websites and kind of show everyone what everything looks like, and if you want to talk about your products as well. And then if we have some time, we'll open up to the audience for Q&A if you guys have any questions you want to ask Kent yourself.
So I'm just going to give you, thanks. It's just like mine. Let me back up to the winery first, actually, just so I can.
It's the next tab.
Oh, sorry, technology. My blindness glasses. So this is my 66 Ford pickup, which you see right here. This is my vineyard. I'm gonna tell you the story of the truck. I think it'll relay back to what I was trying to achieve when I created the brand. So I'm from Kansas originally, Baptist teetotalers all the way through. I'm the absolute black sheep of my family because I make and sell alcohol. My grandparents, Grandma Mary, she was born in Western Kansas, and she got set up. Her mom was Catholic. She got set up with a fella in Eastern Kansas and actually traveled by bus across Kansas to meet this Catholic guy that they'd set her up with and meet him in a place called Fredonia. And when she got there, that guy was away on the wheat harvest, which takes you for months up to Oklahoma, around Colorado, down to Nebraska. They don't do it anymore. That's what the sort of migrant work was back in the day. So he wasn't there. So they assigned her a chaperone because they didn't think it was fair that they're appropriate that she would be walking around by herself. Chaperone was Lauren. He would become my future grandfather. And the way my grandmother described it is that they got hot and heavy, is what she said when they were there. Well, they heard word that this other gentleman that she was supposed to have met was coming back, and they didn't want to mess with the messiness of all that. So she went back to Western Kansas. He stayed in the area they were in, and they agreed to write letters. So my grandmother got back, and she fired off a letter in the Senate, fired off another letter in the Senate, still hadn't gotten anything back, fired off another letter in the Senate. This went on for like 2 weeks. She never got a letter back. And so she was like, I give up. So she actually starts dating somebody else. And she's dating this other person, and she's getting ready for a date one night. And she's on the second story of their farmhouse, and she hears rocks at the window. And she goes and she opens up the window and she looks outside, and there's Lauren. And Lauren says, you quit writing me, but I came to do what I said I was going to do. And she's like, quit writing you, hang on a minute. She goes downstairs. She finds out the very first letter that Lauren sent. He sent a letter to her and said, I'm going to Methodist Church in about a month, and I'm going to swing by and see you. Mary's mother, my great-grandmother, intercepted that letter, saw that he wasn't Catholic, and never delivered any of the letters to my grandmother back in the day. So my grandmother Lauren figured this out, and she goes inside and she says, Dad, there's a coyote in the barn. And my great-grandfather comes out with a shotgun to take care of the coyote that's in the barn. And she said, actually, there's not a coyote in the barn. This is Lauren. He's the guy I was telling you about from months ago. I think Mom's been intercepting our letters. And then Lauren turns to my great-grandfather and says, I'd like your daughter's hand in marriage. And my great-grandfather says, well, okay. And my grandmother says, tell Mom after we're gone. And so my grandmother Mary left her family. She never talked to her mom again. She left her family with Lauren. They went back to Fredonia, Kansas. That was 1937, is when they got married. My grandfather told her that he would take her on a honeymoon to Niagara Falls, but he couldn't go right now because he had to go wait on the wheat harvest. So she ends up moving in with her in-laws on day 2 of their marriage while he leaves. And like I said, he promised to take her on a honeymoon to Niagara Falls. They bought they're married in 37. They bought the truck new in 1966. It's this truck right here. They went on their honeymoon in 1986 in this truck. They finally went on their honeymoon from Kansas to Niagara Falls. My grandfather died in 1987, 1 year later, and I inherited this truck. So that's the story, and the truck is on the label as well. And I still drive this truck nearly every day. I'm in the process of getting it converted into an EV because the engine has given up the ghost and it's time to do something with it. But that's my truck. I make one wine only. Road 31 is a road back in Kansas that connected my maternal and my paternal grandparents. And my parents grew up there, and they went to the same one-room schoolhouse halfway between those two. So to me, this was a pretty amazing story that I had in the hopper for me. But again, here I am at William and Mary interfacing with all these people back east that probably don't know the Midwest, et cetera. And I could take and kind of bottle up that story and I could go out and sell this thing to people and it's resonating. So it's out there. So that's Road 31. We'll be opening it up and anybody who's of age can come taste if they want to after this. The brewery, a little different. Like I said, told you about the cranes, told you about Mare Island. Mare Island was incredibly influential throughout all the years. And so the idea behind the brand was, this isn't Kent and Ryan, my business partner. It's not Kent and Ryan's Excellent Brewing Adventure. The point behind the brewery was, we're going to tell the story of Mare Island. So every single beer has a story that went on in Mare Island. And because of I'm who I am, I picked the most colorful stories I can find to put in those cans as we go. And a couple things about the brewery. We started, this is what the brewery kind of looks like. It's a little hard to tell through that back picture there. But yeah, it's kind of hard to tell in the background. It sits right on the water. These are coal sheds. They were built in 1898. We refurbished one of them. They stored coal for the steamships in the Navy. And Teddy Roosevelt, he had something called the Great White Fleet, where he basically went around the world and tried to make the world know of the US's presence and carry a big stick, if you've ever heard that before. They stopped here and actually coal back in the day. And when we dug up the floors to build the brewery, we actually found hunks of coal underneath the concrete that were from 1898 to 1906. That's when this served as a coal shed back in the day. So it was super historical in everything that we did. We launched a tap room, and this town just rallied behind it because all of their families had worked on Mare Island over all these years. And we went to make merchandise. We sell so much merchandise because all these families had so much pride in Mare Island, and they didn't have anywhere to put that pride until we came out with merchandise from here. So we really tapped into something that has legs and has the ability for staying power, which has been really great. I'm going to tell you the story of the Saginaw, and then we'll get on with the tasting. The Saginaw is the very first beer we ever made, Saginaw Golden Ale. Ryan and I had made the beer. We made it in the backyard, the very first brew. Start small, or dream big, test small, and then invest. We made the very first one, the Saginaw. And then after we did that, we started making larger batches. Then we decided we need to get this thing in a bottle. So we made the very first bottles of Saginaw Golden Ale. Ryan's 10 years younger. He knows how to do Instagram and everything else. So Ryan puts out there, we had 25 followers on Facebook back then. I know the number. And he said, tonight, only the very first bottles of Saginaw Golden Ale. And so we were launching the Saginaw. Let me back up and tell you the story of the Saginaw. The Saginaw is the very first ship ever built on Mare Island. And the Saginaw was a steamship that was a sail ship turned into a Siberia steamship. It fought Confederates, it fought pirates. It was all over China for a while. And it was out in Midway Island, and it was on its way back to Mare Island. And there's a small atoll out there. It's called Green Island, but there's not a stitch of green on it. And it's basically a sandbar in the middle of the Pacific. And back then, this was pre-radio, this was the 1860s. It was maritime custom that if you were military, you swung by there because it was famous for shipwrecks, and you would have to rescue the castaways that were stranded on this little island. So the Saginaw was doing its duty. It was stopping by the island to see. They came in under dark. They blew the tide calculations. They ended up shipwrecked on this island. 69 sailors make it to shore. It was a slow motion shipwreck. They get the captain's skiff off of the boat and get it ashore. All their provisions. Now there's 69 sailors standing in the middle of the Pacific. It's the end of the season. They don't know when they're going to be rescued, and they're trying to figure out what the hell they're going to do. So 5 of them say, you know what? Let's take the captain's skiff. Let's put some sails on it, and we will sail this 29 days, 1,500 miles to Hawaii and initiate the rescue. So the 5 of these guys, super brave, they get on the Saginaw's captain's skiff. They get 1 day out to sea. They get swamped by a rogue wave. It soils all their provisions, all their fresh water, and everything else. So they have a 28-day journey with no water and no food. And they're catching water off the sails while it's raining. They're catching fish, albatross out of the air. They're catching flying fish. They try to kill each other. The story of this is unbelievable. They pulled into Hawaii, the modern day where the Princeville Hotel is, if you know Hawaii at all. They're pulling in, they capsized in Hawaii after 29 days. 4 of them perish. One guy, his name's William Halford, makes it ashore. He goes and finds King Kamehameha. King Kamehameha sends a steamship back and rescues the other 64 that are still stranded on the island. And William Halford wins the Medal of Honor. He's awarded the Medal of Honor for this, right? So fast forward, we're launching Saginaw. We're in the tap room, Ryan and I, we're the only employees at this point. We've got our 25 followers. We told them we got these bottles that are coming out quick. And we see a knock at the window. And it's like 4 o'clock. We don't open until 5. So I go over there and I open up the door, and there's this kid standing. He's got a shaved head on one side. He's got this kind of Metallica, we call them white beater shirts. He's got this like shirt on. I don't think he was even 21. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, I came for a bottle of that Saginaw. And I'm like, oh, okay, good, good. We don't open for an hour. So if you come back in an hour and maybe bring your ID, I'd love to sell you a bottle of Saginaw. And he's like, well, it's just that my great-great-grandfather is this guy, William Halford. And it was the great-great-grandson of the hero of the Saginaw ship story. So we brought him inside, we hugged him, we have pictures of us drinking the very first bottle of Saginaw Gold Nail with the great-great-grandson of William Halford. So all of our beers have this deeper story, and our mission at the brewing company is to share Mare Island through craft. Craft beer is one of the things we do. We also do spent grain crackers. We do spent grain things for pets. We do handmade growlers. We do all this different stuff. So if it has to do with Mare Island, it's crafty. We want to get into it, but it's really about the craft beer. And again, we're selling the story as much as we are the beer when we get into it. So that is the brewery. I'll just show you some of what the beers look like. That's the Saginaw Gold Nail on the right. That's our logo in the center there. All these beers, the 21ers is an ode to a group of African Americans who wrote a letter to Kennedy talking about all the racism that was happening on Mare Island. And some of the wording from that letter made it into the Civil Rights Act. And nobody knows about this. There's one guy who's left alive. These are all our offerings. The Saginaw, Survivor's Tale, Pale Ale, which is about the Indianapolis, Hydraulic Sandwich, which means liquid lunch, which is what all the welders used to call it when they'd have a couple beers at lunch. And they used to say, my welds weren't quite as straight after lunch as they were before, but we still won the war. That's what they would tell us. The coal shed is from the coal shed itself. Ivy Bells is too long to tell you right now. War Bond Dry as we did. And Nuclear Sandwich, it was, we built 14 of the 41 for Freedom nuclear submarines on Mare Island. So there's a huge pride in that whole thing. So that's what the brewery is all about. It's not distributed in Virginia. We're self-distributed in the Bay Area. If you come to San Francisco and anywhere San Francisco North, you'll see us in Whole Foods. You'll see us in a bunch of places around there, but it's all just in the Bay Area that we're in. So I think that's kind of an overview of the two.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Thank you for sharing. Just the story behind it was unbelievable. I think we have a few minutes for some questions. Maybe we'll take 2 questions. We're running out of time here, but I want to get the audience a chance to ask any burning questions they may have. We'll pass around the mic so the audience can hear you.
That's a microphone.
Yeah, it's a throwable.
Oh, good Lord.
It seems like the spirits industry is like highly competitive from my point of view. Maybe you agree, and it seems like it's a very like high fixed cost environment as well. So how are you able to get this thing up off the ground? Like once you have this idea in your head, how are you able to turn it into reality? Like what was the shifting point?
I think it's a very astute point. And for a traditional brewery or a traditional winery, it's mostly a volume game. You need to get up to speed fast. Distribution is a huge deal, and you've got to get to scale as fast as you can. The reason that is because winemakers are expensive, vineyard managers are expensive, salespeople are super expensive. What I had done all those things. And so my cost structure was super low because I had learned all that. And I eliminated literally hundreds of thousands of dollars from these tiny startup kind of things as we got into it. I will say I used the money from the winery to build the brewery, and that required a much larger investment. But I was able to be super nimble because of that. And I'll point out to me, entrepreneurship, yeah, you see an opportunity out there in the marketplace, but that needs to dovetail with your experience and your skill set. And that's where the magic happens. And you'll see people go out there and try to start something, but they don't understand it, or they don't have a passion for it, or they haven't been involved in it. And it really, to me, doesn't matter how good of an idea it is, if you don't resonate with it. And to me, I was just like, oh, I can do these 3 things that otherwise cost so much money. I can do this small and still make decent money out of the whole thing. And that was kind of the unique proposition I have. And I will say there's a lot of people trying to do kind of what I do, and particularly there's some hedge fund managers, and they're like, I'm gonna try to do that. And then they pay $200,000 to a bigger consultant, $200,000 to a winemaker. They're like, why is this not working? And I'm like, well, because your cost structure is not right in this. You get in there. And one other thing I'll throw in there is, in addition to knowing that, one thing I recommend is a lot of the entrepreneurial sort of groups that I'm a part of or whatever, they always talk about thinking outside the box. I'm sure you've heard that term many, many times. I'm a little different, I'm more traditional, but you have to understand what the box is and why the box exists and what's in the box before you go start thinking about being outside the box, because that box is there for a reason. And for me, the box was there preventing small people from doing things because nobody had all that skill set inside. I had that skill set, so then I was able to go outside the box because, does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Great. I think one more question.
Anyone? Ma'am.
So first I'll start with an encouragement. So you had said that you think you have to get better at failing wisely. Your comment about dream big, test small, invest, like that's it exactly. So I think you're an expert at that. My question might be a little bit of an odd one, but I want to sort of see where your head goes. If for some reason tomorrow, these are both taken away from you, what do you do the next day?
The next day?
Yeah, or that day.
Yeah. What I would do, and don't ever repeat this to anybody because it would get me in trouble. I would go to all the people that keep asking me to help them or asking me to do something or asking for my secret sauce or whatever, and I would start consulting instantly. Not because I like it. In fact, I'd probably hate it. There would be a way to make money right away and go back and to get back in touch with what everybody's doing, what's going on in the world. There's no better way to learn things than on somebody else's dime. Absolutely go learn on somebody else's dime and then go do it on your own. If you're trying to figure it out on your own, find a partner who knows how to do it or something. It's very difficult to do. So I would go back into it, probably in sales actually for a little bit as well. And I would get back into that traditional role because to me, as soon as I'm in something like that, opportunities just start popping up like mushrooms all over the place. And then, that's why I'm saying don't tell anybody, I would just punt all that consulting to the side and I would go chase down whatever it is I found in that. I made that up on the spot, but I think that is actually what I would do.
That's really good. And we'll extract that from the recording, just so you know.
I can't say I'd like to consult for you. You can be like, yeah, this kid's not gonna stick around for all.
Thank you.
That's your question.
Appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us about your journey today. It was really awesome. Like Kent mentioned, we will be doing a tasting at the end. So if you are over 21 years, you go to the back of Brandon, he'll get you a wristband and I think we'll do the tasting up here. So
I recommend 3 books to you all, just something to think about. These are 3 of the most influential entrepreneurial books that I ever read, and they're a little bit unusual. Shoe Dog. If you haven't read Shoe Dog, it is the story of Nike, written by Phil Knight. And talk about a guy who understood the box and then just figured out how to do a better box. Shoe Dog, it's a very, very great read. And then if you see that and you like Nike, you like the whole story, go see the movie Air, which is Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, really, really well done. But Shoe Dog, I recommend. And one thing I'd actually urge you guys is to think through if you're reading it. There's some ethical boundaries that he bumped up against in a lot of ways when he was there. And he doesn't dwell on them, but he doesn't varnish over them either. And I think it's really interesting to see how close you can come to not succeeding and what you have to do to hold on to your venture and make a judgment for yourself as to where that is. The next one I'd really recommend to you is Going Infinite. I don't know if anybody's heard of this book, but it's Sam Bankman-Fried, who is a bit of a contemporary of you all. He didn't graduate that long. Well, he never graduated, but he didn't leave MIT that long ago. Started, he was a cryptocurrency guy. He was by far the wealthiest billionaire under the age of 34 there for a while, and just blew up in spectacular fashion. And the author, Michael Lewis, who wrote The Blind Side, Moneyball, Liar's Poker, he was there when all this happened. He was interviewing Sam Bankman-Fried. And if you ever start a business and you think you're a little screwed up, you think things are going a little weird, you think things aren't quite what you expected, read this book, it'll make you feel better. It's the biggest hot mess disaster you've ever seen. And he was making billions during the time. He's now in jail. And so it's a really fascinating read. The last one's a lot drier, I'm a huge fan of Patagonia. And Yvon Chouinard, who started Patagonia, he was just a climber. I knew him as a climber. I didn't know him personally, but that was what he was famous for. Started this amazing business, Patagonia, and is stuck very close to these ethics around how he treats his employees, how he treats the planet. Ran an ad that said, "Don't buy this jacket," and explained why the environmental impact of this jacket was so bad. But the secret underneath it all was buy this one jacket and never buy another jacket again and spend this money on it when you do it. And he wrote a book called Let My People Go Surfing. And it was about how he imbued a culture into his business that I know people who work at Patagonia, and if you cut them, they bleed Patagonia blue. It's unbelievable what he's done. And if you want to read a case study, he recently took his, I don't know if it's $1 billion, it's probably just shy of that, but hundreds of millions of dollars that Patagonia was worth for him and his family. He put it into a trust to help the planet. So he didn't even keep his wealth, he put it into a trust to help the planet. And it's an amazing story. So 3 books for you that I'd recommend.
Oh, that's great. We're gonna give a few announcements before we let you guys head out or begin the tasting. So coming up at the hub next Friday, we have our second rocket pitch of the semester. So if you're interested in pitching an idea, make sure to sign up for that. That will also be at noon, like the event today, and we will be serving lunch. You can also come as an audience member and watch that. Also on that Friday is the weekend that we are starting Slingshot. And this will take place from the 1st to the 3rd, and sign up is required. I know we cap it at 25. I'm not exactly sure what we're at now, but if you'd like to do that, that's basically a 3-day thing where you can really work on adventure, and it's like a sprint to just kind of get it going. So if you want to sign up for that or you're interested, just talk to one of us and we can get you connected with that. And then on the 6th, also at noon, we're doing a topic talk with Eric Berg about entrepreneurial finance. He's going to come in and we're going to chat with him and eat some lunch. So if you like the guest speaker event today and you want to learn from someone else, definitely recommend coming back to that. And then lastly, we have a QR up here with some feedback. We'd love to hear how you guys thought the event went today. So if you can take out your phones and scan that, that would mean a lot to us, just so we can continue to deliver programming you guys enjoy. And as I mentioned earlier, we have our open swag shop in the back today. So if you've been coming to the events for a bit and you think you wrapped up some points and you want to see what you could get, definitely come on the back, and Jonathan's back there with all the stuff. So yeah, if you're interested in any of that, just go ahead and do that. But thank you all for coming. And have a great weekend.